rationalize. There are certain experiences that refuse to fade, no matter how much time passes or how hard you try to rationalize them. The kind that sits in the back of your mind, waiting for a quiet moment to remind you they happened. What I'm about to share with you are stories from people who encountered something in their homes, something that had no business being there, lights that behaved like they were being controlled by unseen hands, shadows that moved with purpose, voices that whispered in empty rooms. These aren't tales meant to thrill you. They're accounts from ordinary people who found themselves living in spaces that didn't feel entirely theirs anymore. Settle in, because from here on, the story doesn't need to be seen, only heard. Before we begin, I'd like to know, where are you listening from right now? What time is it where you are? Drop a comment and let me know. There's something about sharing these experiences together, even from different parts of the world, that makes them feel a little less isolating. Story 1. My sister told me she was hearing things in her apartment for weeks before I finally believed her. She'd moved into this place in late October, a second-floor walk-up in an old building downtown. The rent was suspiciously cheap, but the landlord explained it had been vacant for a while and he just needed someone in there. She took it. College student budget, you understand. The first few weeks were fine. She unpacked, settled in, and started her routine. Then, about a month in, she called me one night around 11. Said she kept hearing whispers coming from the living room. I asked the obvious questions. Neighbors? Thin walls? She said no, she'd checked. The apartment next door was empty, and had been since she moved in. The unit below her housed an elderly woman who went to bed at 8 every night like clockwork. I told her it was probably just the building settling, old pipes, something mundane. She said okay and hung up. But the calls kept coming, always late at night, always the same thing, whispers she couldn't quite make out, like someone having a conversation just below the threshold of understanding. She'd walk into the living room and they'd stop. She'd go back to her bedroom, and within 10 minutes, they'd start again. The thing that finally got my attention was when she told me about the lights. She'd be sitting in her room, door closed, working on an assignment. The light in the hallway outside her room would turn on. She'd hear the click of the switch, clear as anything. She'd open her door to check, and the light would be on, even though she turned it off before going to bed. This happened 3 nights in a row. On the 4th night, she stayed up and watched. Kept her door open a crack, the laptop screen dimmed, just waiting. Around 2 in the morning, she heard it, the distinct click of the light switch. The hallway flooded with light. But here's what made her call me in tears. There was no one in the hallway. The switch had been flipped. She could see it from her angle, in the down position, light on. But no hand had touched it. No shadow, no movement, nothing. I drove over the next morning, checked the wiring, looked at the switch, even called an electrician friend to take a look. Everything was fine. No shorts, no faulty wiring. The switch worked perfectly normally when we tested it. But the whispers continued, and the lights kept turning on. She started sleeping with headphones in. White noise turned up. Started leaving more lights on, thinking maybe it would help. It didn't. Then one night, she woke up to her bedroom light turning on. Not the hallway this time, the light directly above her bed. She heard the chain pull, that little metallic clink, and the room went from dark to bright in an instant. She laid there, frozen, staring at the ceiling. The chain was still swaying slightly. She moved out 2 days later, broke her lease, paid the penalty, didn't care. The landlord didn't seem surprised. He asked if she'd lasted longer than the previous tenant. She asked how long that was. 3 weeks, he said. She never asked what happened to make them leave. She didn't want to know. Story 2. I've worked night security for almost 15 years, so I'm used to being alone in big buildings after dark. This particular job was at a museum, an old historic house converted into a public space. My shift ran from midnight to 8 a.m., mostly just walking the floors every hour, checking doors, making sure the alarms were set. Easy work. The house itself was from the 1800s, belonged to some local family with money. They'd preserved it pretty well, kept most of the original furniture, even some personal belongings. It was the kind of place that felt lived in, even though no one had actually lived there in decades. I'd been working there for about 2 months when I started noticing the pattern with the lights. There was a room on the second floor, an old study or library, lined with bookshelves and a heavy wooden desk. Every time I did my rounds, the lamp on that desk would be on, every single time. And I absolutely know, I turned it off on my previous round. The first couple times, I figured I'd just forgotten. Make a mental note to be more careful. But then I started really paying attention, making it a point to remember. I'd turn off the lamp, check the switch twice, even say it out loud to myself. Lamp off, then I'd continue my route. 1 hour later, lamp on. I checked for timers, faulty wiring, anything. Nothing. It was just a regular lamp with a regular switch. Then I started hearing footsteps. They'd come from upstairs when I was on the first floor, or from downstairs when I was on the second. Always in the distance, never close enough to investigate before they stopped. Just a few steps, deliberate and slow, then silence. I told myself it was the old building, wood expanding and contracting. I'd heard that explanation 100 times, used it myself when explaining noises to worried clients. But these didn't sound random. They sounded like someone walking with purpose. One night, around 3 a.m., I was sitting in the security office reviewing the camera feeds. We had cameras in most rooms, except the bathrooms and a few storage areas. I was flipping through the feeds when I saw it. A shadow moved across the wall in the second floor hallway. Just a shadow, no source. It moved from one end of the hall to the other, smooth and deliberate, like someone walking past a light source. But there was no one there. The camera showed an empty hallway. I watched the feed for 10 minutes straight and didn't see anything else. Checked the timestamp, made a note in my log, tried to rationalize it as a glitch or reflection. But then I heard them again, the footsteps, and this time they were coming from right above me. The room above the security office was that study, the one with the lamp. I sat there listening to someone walk across the floor, back and forth, measured steps. I could hear the old floorboards creaking under weight. This went on for maybe 2 minutes, then silence. I waited 5 minutes before going up there. My hands were shaking when I unlocked the security office door. The study was empty, lamp on, of course, but empty. I checked every corner, looked behind furniture, even checked the closet. Nothing, but the room felt warm, like someone had just been there. And there was this smell, faint but distinct, old tobacco and leather, like a pipe had been smoked recently. No one had smoked in that building in years. It was strictly prohibited, and had been since it became a museum. I finished that shift, but I put in my 2 weeks the next morning. They tried to convince me to stay, offered a raise, said they'd have someone else do the night shifts, and I could switch to days. I told them, thanks, but no. The guy they hired after me lasted 3 nights. I heard he ran out of the building at 4 a.m. and never came back for his paycheck. They ended up closing the museum for a few months after that, and did some kind of cleansing ceremony. I don't know if it worked. I never went back to find out. Story 3. The house my parents bought when I was 16 seemed perfect at first. It was in a quiet neighborhood, good schools, and a big backyard. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, recently renovated. The previous owners had moved out of state for work, leaving it in great condition. We got it for under market value, which my parents thought was a steal. I got the bedroom at the end of the upstairs hall, farthest from my parents' room. I liked the privacy. Big windows, good light during the day, enough space for all my stuff. Everything was fine for the first month. Then my mom started mentioning the lights. She'd wake up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom and notice lights on downstairs. The kitchen, usually, sometimes the living room. She'd go down to turn them off, figuring one of us had forgotten. But in the morning, when she'd ask about it, neither my dad nor I had been downstairs the night before. This happened at least twice a week. Dad checked the electrical system, though maybe we had some kind of timer situation from the previous owners. Nothing. Just regular light switches, nothing automated. Then I started hearing things in my room. It would be late, maybe 1 or 2 in the morning, and I'd hear what sounded like someone walking in the hallway outside my door. Slow, deliberate footsteps on the hardwood floor. They'd stop right outside my room, pause for a moment, then continue down the hall toward my parents' room. The first time it happened, I thought it was my dad getting up for water or something, but when I checked the next morning, he said he'd slept through the night. The footsteps became regular, almost predictable, between 1 and 2 a.m. every few nights. But the thing that really bothered me started about 2 months in. I'd be lying in bed, almost asleep, and I'd hear breathing. Not my own, someone else's, coming from the corner of my room near the closet. Deep, steady breaths, like someone standing there in the dark, just waiting. I'd turn on my light, and there'd be nothing. Turn it back off, and within a few minutes, the breathing would start again. I told my parents. My mom looked worried. My dad looked skeptical. He came up to my room that night, sat in the chair by my desk, told me he'd stay up and listen. Around 1:30, I heard it. The breathing, clear as anything, coming from the closet corner. I looked at my dad. He was staring in that direction, completely still. After a moment, he got up, turned on the light, and checked the closet. Nothing. We both sat there in the light for about an hour. He didn't say much. Finally, he told me to try to get some sleep, left my door open, and went back to his room. The next morning at breakfast, he didn't bring it up, but I could tell he'd heard it too. The lights kept turning on. The footsteps continued, and the breathing in my room became almost nightly. Then one night, my mom woke up to voices downstairs. She said it sounded like 2 people having a conversation, quiet but distinct. A man and a woman, she thought. She woke up my dad, and they both sat at the top of the stairs, listening. The voices went on for about 5 minutes. They couldn't make out words, just the cadence of conversation, back and forth. Then silence. Dad went down to check. Every light in the living room and kitchen was on, no one there. We contacted the previous owners through the realtor, asking if they'd experienced anything unusual. They took 3 days to respond. When they did, it was brief. They said they'd never felt comfortable in the house after dark. That's all they'd say. My parents started looking at other houses about a week later. We moved out 4 months after we'd moved in. Took a loss on the sale, but no one seemed to care. The family that bought it from us moved out within 6 months. I checked. The house has been sold 3 times in the last 8 years. I drive by it sometimes when I visit my parents. They live in a different neighborhood now. The lights in that house are always on, even during the day. Story 4. Working from home sounds ideal until you realize you're spending 12 hours a day in the same small apartment. I'd been freelancing for about a year when I took this place. Studio apartment, affordable, decent internet, close to a coffee shop for when I needed to get out. The building was old, but well maintained, and my unit had good light during the day. I set up my desk by the window, got into a routine. Wake up, coffee, work until evening, sleep, repeat. About 3 weeks in, my desk lamp started acting strange. I'd be in the middle of something, typing away, and the lamp would flicker. Just once, quick. I'd look up, make sure the bulb was screwed in properly, check the connection. Everything seemed fine, but it kept happening. Random flickers throughout the day, no pattern I could identify. Then it started turning off completely. I'd be working, lamp on, and suddenly it would shut off, click, like someone had hit the switch. I'd turn it back on, and it would be fine for a few hours, then it would happen again. I bought a new lamp, thinking it was just faulty. The same thing happened with the new one. That's when I started noticing the shadow. It was subtle at first, just something in my peripheral vision. I'd be focused on my screen and catch movement to my left, near the bathroom door. When I'd look directly at it, nothing. Just the open bathroom, exactly as I'd left it. This happened multiple times a day for about a week. I tried to ignore it, chalked it up to eye strain, too much screen time. I started taking more breaks, doing eye exercises, and even got my vision checked. Nothing wrong, but the shadow kept appearing. One afternoon, I decided to test something. I set up my phone to record the area near the bathroom and left it running while I worked. After an hour, I reviewed the footage. At the 32-minute mark, I saw it. A dark shape moved across the bathroom doorway, left to right, clearly visible on camera. It didn't have a defined form, just a concentrated darkness that moved with purpose. The timestamp matched when I'd seen it in my peripheral vision. I watched that clip probably 20 times. There was no explanation for it, no light source that could create that shadow, no reflection, nothing. Just movement where there shouldn't be any. I started working from the coffee shop more often after that, but I had to come home eventually. The nights were worse than the days. I'd be lying in bed, scrolling on my phone or reading, and I'd hear whispers, very faint, like someone speaking just on the other side of the wall. The apartment next to mine was vacant, had been since I moved in. The landlord said he was renovating it, but I'd never seen any work being done. The whispers were always too quiet to make out words, just the sound of someone talking, continuous and low. One night, I put my ear against the wall, trying to hear better. Maybe figure out if it was coming from outside the building or a pipe or something. The moment my ear touched the wall, the whispering stopped. Complete silence for about 5 seconds. Then I heard 3 distinct knocks from inside the wall, right where my ear was pressed. I pulled back fast, sat in the middle of my bed, just staring at the wall, waited for another sound. Nothing came. I didn't sleep that night. I started researching the building the next day, found out the unit next to mine hadn't been vacant for renovations. The previous tenant had broken their lease suddenly and moved out in the middle of the night. Before that, it had been empty for 8 months. Before that, someone had lived there for 2 weeks. I talked to my landlord, asked about the history. He got defensive, said there was no problem with the building. If I wasn't happy, I could leave. Real aggressive about it, which told me everything I needed to know. I found a new place within the week. Month-to-month lease this time. More expensive, but in a newer building. On my last night in that studio, I was packing my final boxes. It was around 10 p.m. I wanted to get out of there. The lamp on my desk started flickering again, faster than usual. Then it started turning on and off repeatedly, like someone flipping the switch over and over. I unplugged it. It stopped. Then every light in the apartment started doing the same thing. On, off, rapid succession. The overhead light, the bathroom light, the small lamp by my bed. All of them synchronized. I grabbed my bag and left. I came back the next morning with a friend to get the rest of my stuff. Lights were all on when we unlocked the door, even though I'd definitely turned them off when I'd fled. My friend asked if I'd left them on. I said no. He gave me a look, but didn't push it. We got my stuff out in under an hour. I left the keys on the counter and never looked back. The building is still there. Still has apartments listed as available. I wonder how long people last these days. Story 5. My grandmother died in her sleep at 87. Peaceful and at home like she wanted. We inherited the house, my mother, and her siblings. None of them wanted to live in it. Too many memories, too much stuff to sort through. They decided to clean it out and sell it, split the money. I volunteered to help with the cleaning. I'd spent a lot of time in that house growing up. Felt like I owed it to my grandmother. The house was old, built in the 40s, kept up well, but definitely showing its age. My grandmother had lived there for 60 years and raised 5 kids there. Every room had history, layers of family life packed into closets and drawers. I stayed there while we sorted through everything, figuring it was easier than driving back and forth. I took my grandmother's old room upstairs. Felt weird about it, but the other bedrooms were full of boxes and furniture. The first night was quiet. I was exhausted from cleaning all day and fell asleep fast. The second night, I woke up to her lamp turning on. The lamp on her nightstand, the one she'd used for reading before bed every night, just clicked on by itself, lit up the room. I laid there confused for a moment, then reached over and turned it off. Figured it was a loose connection or something. It turned back on. I turned it off again. Waited. It stayed off for maybe 30 seconds, then clicked back on. This happened 4 more times before I unplugged it completely. Then I just laid there in the dark, trying to make sense of it. The next morning, I checked the lamp. Perfectly normal, nothing wrong with the switch or wiring. I plugged it back in during the day, left it off, and went about my cleaning. Never turned on by itself during daylight. That night, same thing. The moment I settled into bed, the lamp clicked on. This became routine. Every night for a week, the lamp would turn on after I got into bed. I stopped fighting it, just left it on. It seemed easier. But then other things started. I'd be downstairs sorting through kitchen stuff, and I'd hear footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate, walking from the bedroom to the bathroom and back. The same route my grandmother would take when she was alive, especially toward the end when she needed the bathroom more frequently at night. I'd go upstairs to check, and of course there'd be no one, just empty rooms and boxes. The footsteps happened almost every evening around the same time, between 7 and 8. That's when my grandmother used to get ready for bed, part of her routine. Then I started hearing her voice. Not words exactly, more like the sound of her humming. She used to hum while she cooked or cleaned old songs from her childhood. I'd be in the kitchen and hear it coming from upstairs, faint but unmistakable. Her specific melody, her rhythm. I told my mother about it. She asked if I wanted to stay somewhere else. I said no, it didn't feel threatening. Honestly, it felt almost comforting in a strange way. But there was one night that shifted things. I was in the living room going through old photo albums. It was late, maybe 11, and I was lost in pictures from decades ago. That's when I heard it clearly from the top of the stairs. Getting late. My grandmother's voice, distinct and clear. The exact tone she'd use when I was a kid and staying up too late at her house. I looked toward the stairs. The light at the top was on. I hadn't turned it on. I sat there for a long moment, photo album in my lap, just staring up at that light. Then I said out loud, "Okay, Grandma, I'll go to bed soon." The light turned off. I closed the album, went upstairs, and got ready for bed. The lamp on the nightstand was already on, waiting. I finished cleaning out the house 2 weeks later. My family sold it to a young couple with a baby. I didn't tell them about the lights or the footsteps or the humming. Part of me felt bad about that. Part of me thought maybe it wouldn't happen for them. My mom asked if I took the lamp, the one from the nightstand. I said no, left it there with the house. She seemed relieved. Story 6. The house I rented in college was perfect for parties, which is exactly why 4 of us went in on it together. Big place. Old converted Victorian split into units. We had the whole first floor, 3 bedrooms, decent-sized living room, and a kitchen that actually had counter space. The landlord lived upstairs, kept to himself, never complained about noise, as long as we kept it reasonable. We threw a party about once a month, nothing too crazy, just friends and music. Good times. The issue started after one party in late November. Everyone had left by around 2 a.m. We'd cleaned up most of the mess. My roommates had gone to bed. I was wiping down the kitchen counters when I noticed the light in the living room flickering. It was one of those old ceiling fixtures, probably original to the house. We'd never had problems with it before. I walked into the living room to check it, and it stopped flickering the moment I entered. Stayed steady. I figured it was just a loose bulb, made a mental note to tighten it later, and went to bed. Next night, same thing. Flickering when I was in other rooms, steady when I checked on it. This went on for about a week. Then my roommate Jake mentioned hearing something weird. He'd been up late studying, everyone else asleep. Said he heard what sounded like a party going on in the living room. Music, voices, laughter. He assumed one of us had people over and didn't tell him, and felt annoyed about it. Went to check, ready to tell everyone to keep it down. The living room was empty and silent. He stood there confused and went back to his room. The moment he closed his door, he heard it again. The party sounds muffled, but distinct. I told him he was probably just tired, hearing things from outside or upstairs. He insisted it was coming from our living room. Then Emma had a similar experience. Home alone on a Sunday afternoon, I heard conversation from the living room. Multiple voices, like several people talking at once. She called out, thinking some of us had come home without her hearing. No response, but the conversation continued. She walked into the living room, empty, silent. She walked back to her room. Voices started again immediately. By this point, we were all getting uncomfortable. We talked about it together, tried to find logical explanations. Old house, thin walls, sound traveling weird. We almost convinced ourselves. Then the lights started happening during our actual parties. We'd have people over, music playing, everyone having a good time. The lights would start flickering, all of them at once. Living room, kitchen, hallway, on and off, on and off. People would notice, comment on it, ask if we needed to call an electrician. It only lasted about 30 seconds each time, then everything would go back to normal. But it happened at every party after that, like clockwork. Always when the place was most crowded, most energetic. Our friends started making jokes about our ghost, calling the house haunted. We played along, laughed it off, but privately, we were bothered. The final incident happened at our last party before winter break. Full house, probably 40 people, music loud, everyone dancing. The lights started their flickering routine, except this time they didn't stop after 30 seconds. They kept going, faster and faster, almost strobing. The music cut out suddenly, even though nothing was wrong with the speaker system. In the silence, with the lights flashing, someone near the kitchen screamed. Everyone turned to look. She was pointing at the doorway to the hall where the lights were off. She said she'd seen someone standing there, watching the party. A figure in the dark, completely still. Multiple people looked. Most saw nothing. But 3 others said they saw it too. A shadow darker than the unlit hallway, shaped like a person, standing motionless. Then the light stopped flickering and came back steady. The music started again on its own. The shadow was gone. People left pretty quickly after that. The party vibe was dead. We moved out at the end of the semester, all of us going separate ways anyway. Told the landlord we weren't renewing the lease, but didn't give a real reason. He asked if we'd had any issues with the place. We said no, just time to move on. He nodded slowly, like he'd heard that before. Story 7. I work as a home inspector, which means I see a lot of houses in various states. Most are fine, standard stuff, typical problems you'd expect in buildings of different ages. But every once in a while, you get a property that just feels wrong the moment you step inside. This particular house was a referral from a real estate agent I'd worked with before. The seller wanted an inspection before listing, wanted to know what repairs might be needed. Standard procedure. I showed up on a Tuesday afternoon, bright sunny day. The house was empty. The owners had already moved. It was a mid-century ranch, well maintained from the outside, a decent neighborhood. I unlocked the door with the key the agent had given me and stepped inside. The temperature dropped immediately, not like air conditioning, more like walking into a basement or cave. Just cold, damp air that didn't match the warm day outside. I made a note of it, figured there might be insulation issues or a moisture problem. I started my inspection in the living room, checking outlets, windows, looking for cracks or water damage. Everything seemed structurally sound, but the cold remained, even intensified as I moved through the house. I was in the kitchen, checking under the sink, when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Clear, distinct, someone walking on the hardwood floor. I stood up fast, called out, no answer. The footsteps stopped. I walked into the hallway, looking both ways, empty. All the doors were open. I could see into every room from where I stood. No one. I went back to work, trying to focus. Old houses make noise. I'd heard plenty of unexplainable sounds before. This was no different, I told myself. Then the lights in the kitchen started flickering. Just the kitchen, no other room. I checked the electrical panel, looked at the wiring in the kitchen. Everything was up to code, a relatively new installation. No reason for flickering. But it continued while I was in that room and stopped when I left. I moved to the bedrooms, working quickly now, wanting to finish and get out. In the master bedroom, I noticed something odd. The light switch was in the on position, but the overhead light wasn't working. I flipped it off and on several times. Nothing. Checked the bulb. It was fine. Tested the socket with my voltage tester, getting power. I made a note to check the circuit breaker and started to leave the room. The light turned on behind me. I turned around slowly. The overhead light was on, bright and steady. The switch was still in the position I'd left it, off. I stared at it for a moment, then very deliberately flipped the switch to the on position. The light stayed on, flipped it off. The light went off. Flipped it back on. Light came on. Normal behavior now, but I had clearly seen it on when the switch was off. I finished the inspection as quickly as possible and didn't even do my usual thorough check of the attic. I wanted out of that house. In my car, writing up my notes, I noticed my recording app was on. I use it sometimes to make voice notes during inspections, but I hadn't turned it on that day. I checked the recording. It was 42 minutes long, from the moment I had entered the house. I listened to it. There was me, walking around, making observations, the usual sounds. But underneath, throughout the entire recording, there was something else. Whispering. Constant, quiet whispering. Multiple voices, overlapping, impossible to understand. I'd been in that house for 42 minutes and hadn't heard any of it clearly, but my phone had picked it up, clear as day. I called the real estate agent, told her the house had some electrical issues that needed addressing before listing. Didn't mention the rest. She thanked me for the quick turnaround. The house sold within a month. I saw it pop up on the market again 6 months later. Then again 8 months after that. It's been through 4 owners in 3 years now. I've done hundreds of inspections since then. That's the only recording I've ever deleted. Story 8. My brother moved into his first solo apartment last year, excited about living alone finally. It was a small 1-bedroom in an older building, affordable, close to his work. He'd been there about a month when he started calling me about weird stuff happening. First, it was just his bedroom light. He'd turn it off before leaving for work, come home 8 hours later, and it would be on, every day, for a week. He thought maybe he was forgetting to turn it off. Started taking pictures of the light switch before leaving to prove to himself he'd turned it off. The pictures showed the switch in the off position. The light was still on when he got home. Then his TV started turning on by itself. He'd be in the kitchen making dinner, hear the TV come on in the living room. He'd go check, and it would be on, volume low, showing whatever channel it had been on last. He'd turn it off, go back to cooking. It would turn on again. This happened multiple times a day. He unplugged the TV. When he got home from work, it was plugged back in and on. He called me over to see if I could figure it out. I spent an evening there, checked all his electronics, and looked for anything that could explain it. Nothing. Yuck. While I was there, sitting on his couch, the bedroom light turned on by itself. We both saw it from the living room, the glow appearing under the closed bedroom door. Neither of us had been near that room in over an hour. We went to check, light was on, switched in the up position. I flipped it off. We went back to the living room. 5 minutes later, the light came back on. My brother looked tired, frustrated. He said it happened constantly and had been happening more frequently. He wasn't sleeping well and couldn't relax in his own place. I suggested he talk to his landlord. Maybe there was some kind of electrical problem building-wide. He said he'd tried. The landlord insisted everything was fine and said no other tenants had complained. Then he told me about the shadow. He'd see it in his peripheral vision, always in the hallway between the bedroom and bathroom. A dark shape, roughly person-sized, just standing there. When he'd look directly at it, nothing. But the moment he looked away, he'd catch it in the corner of his eye again. This happened at least once a day, sometimes more. I stayed over that night, sleeping on his couch. I wanted to experience whatever was happening, see if I could help explain it. Around 3 a.m, I woke up to all the lights in the apartment turning on at once. Bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, living room, everything. I sat up, looked around. My brother's bedroom door opened slowly. He stood there, silhouetted in the doorway, not saying anything. Then I heard his voice from the bedroom, behind the figure in the doorway. "Are you seeing this?" The figure in the doorway wasn't my brother. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The figure just stood there, backlit, completely still. I couldn't make out any features, just a dark silhouette shaped like a person. My brother appeared in the doorway next to it, walking right through where it stood. The shadow didn't move, didn't react. "Did you turn on all the lights?" he asked me. I shook my head, pointed at where the shadow figure was standing. He looked. I didn't see it. The lights started flickering. Then, all of them, rapid succession. In the strobing effect, I could see the shadow more clearly. It was facing me, I could tell that much, even though I still couldn't see features. The lights stopped flickering, staying on steady. The shadow was gone. My brother moved out the next week. Broke his lease, didn't care about the penalty. He's staying with friends now, looking for a new place, being very careful about what he picks. The building owner called him a few days after he moved out, asked if he wanted to return for any reason, and said they'd waive the early termination fee if he came back. My brother asked why they were so eager to have him return. The owner admitted the apartment had been hard to keep rented. People didn't tend to stay long. My brother asked how long the previous tenant had lasted. 3 weeks, the owner said. Story 9. I house sit for extra money, usually for people who travel for work or go on extended vacations. It's easy work most of the time. Water plants, check the mail, make sure everything looks lived in so the place doesn't get targeted by thieves. I've done it for years without any issues. Until this one house last summer. The owners were going to Europe for 3 weeks and needed someone to watch their place. It was a nice house in the suburbs, well kept and a good neighborhood. They gave me the full tour, showed me where everything was, and left detailed instructions. They seemed nervous, more than usual for people leaving their house. Asked multiple times if I was sure I was comfortable staying there alone, if I had any concerns. I thought they were just anxious travelers and assured them everything would be fine. The first week was completely normal. I followed their routine, watered plants, brought in mail, and spent evenings watching TV in their living room. No issues. Second week, things changed. I started waking up in the middle of the night to lights being on in other parts of the house. The kitchen light mainly. I'd turn it off before bed, wake up at 2 or 3 a.m. to use the bathroom, and it would be on. I checked the switch multiple times, even tested it to see if it was loose or faulty. It worked fine when I tested it, but every night the kitchen light would be on when I woke up. Then I started hearing movement downstairs while I was in the upstairs bedroom. It sounded like someone walking through the house, opening and closing doors, moving around. The first time it happened, I grabbed my phone ready to call 911, thinking someone had broken in. I crept downstairs, checking every room. No one. All the doors and windows were locked from the inside, security system armed, no sign of entry. But I had definitely heard someone down there. This happened 3 more times that week, always between midnight and 4 a.m. Always the same sounds, footsteps, doors, movement. The final night, I decided to stay downstairs to see if it would still happen if I was already there. I set myself up on the living room couch with a book, all the lights on, trying to stay awake. Around 2:30, the lights started turning off. One by one throughout the house, living room, dining room, kitchen, hallway, each one clicking off in sequence, like someone was going room to room hitting switches. I sat in complete darkness, trying to stay calm. Then I heard footsteps coming from the kitchen, walking toward the living room. Slow, deliberate steps on the hardwood floor, getting closer. I turned on my phone flashlight, pointed it toward the kitchen doorway. Nothing there. But the footsteps continued, now inside the living room, walking past where I was sitting on the couch. I could hear them clearly and could almost feel the presence of someone moving past me. But my light showed nothing, just an empty room. The footsteps went to the stairs, started climbing. I listened to them go all the way up, heard them walk down the upstairs hallway, and heard a door close. Then silence. I spent the rest of that night in my car in the driveway, came back inside when the sun came up. The owners returned 2 days later. I helped them with their luggage, gave them a quick update on the house. "Everything is fine," I said. "No problems." The husband looked at me carefully, asked if I was sure, asked if I'd experienced anything unusual. I hesitated, then said no, everything was fine. The wife looked relieved. The husband still looked concerned. As I was leaving, he stopped me at the door, asked how many nights I'd actually stayed in the house. I told him all of them except last night. He nodded slowly, said I'd done better than most. Previous house sitters usually left after a week. I asked if he wanted to tell me what was going on with the house. He said no, he didn't think I wanted to know. I never house sat for them again. They called a few months later asking if I was available for another trip. I politely declined. They've reached out 3 more times since then. I keep saying no. Story 10. The nursing home where my grandfather spent his last year had a reputation. Not public knowledge, but the staff talked. Certain rooms were harder to keep staffed for night shifts. Certain hallways where nurses wouldn't walk alone after midnight. My grandfather was in room 307, 3rd floor, East Wing. I visited him 3 times a week, usually in the evenings after work. He'd been declining for months, dementia taking more of him each time I saw him. But even through the confusion, he'd mention the same thing every visit. "Someone comes at night," he'd say. "Turn on the lights, won't let me sleep." I thought it was the nurses checking on him, explaining that they needed to monitor patients through the night. He'd shake his head, insistent. "Not the nurses, someone else. Just stand there and watch." The staff assured me this was common with dementia patients. Hallucinations and paranoia were part of the disease. I accepted that explanation. Then one night I stayed late, past visiting hours. My grandfather had been particularly agitated that day. and the nurse said I could stay until he settled down. I sat in the chair next to his bed, lights dimmed, just keeping him company. He fell asleep around 9 o'clock. I stayed for another hour, scrolling on my phone quietly. At 10:15, the room light turned on. Not the dim night light, the full overhead fluorescent light. My grandfather didn't wake up. I got up to turn it off and figured a nurse had hit the switch by mistake. The light switch was on the wall by the door. I hadn't heard anyone come in. The door was still closed. I turned off the light, went back to my chair. 5 minutes later, it turned on again. I watched the door this time. No one came in. No one touched the switch. The light just came on, like someone had flipped it, but no one had. I turned it off again, and this time I stood by the switch, hand on it, waiting. The light stayed off for about 3 minutes. Then I felt the switch move under my hand, flipping up on its own, and the light came on. I pulled my hand back, stared at the switch. My grandfather woke up, looked at the ceiling light, looked at me. "See," he said quietly. "Every night." I went to find the nurse, told her what happened. She didn't seem surprised, just tired. She came back to the room with me, turned off the light, and told me it was an old building with old wiring. Things like that happen sometimes. But she wouldn't make eye contact when she said it. I asked her directly if other patients reported similar things. She hesitated, then admitted that room 307 had more complaints than most. Lights turning on, feelings of being watched. Some patients refused to sleep there. I asked why they kept using it then. She said they needed every bed they had, couldn't afford to leave rooms empty because of superstition. My grandfather passed away 2 weeks later, peaceful in his sleep. When I came to collect his belongings, a different nurse was on duty. She asked if I was family of the patient from 307. I said yes. She looked relieved, said she was glad he wouldn't be bothered by the lights anymore. I started to say something about the electrical issue, but she cut me off. "It's not electrical," she said quietly. "It never was." Then she walked away before I could ask what she meant. Room 307 has been occupied continuously since my grandfather passed. I know because I checked their public room availability on the website. Someone else is dealing with the lights now. Some things don't have explanations, and maybe that's harder to accept than any ghost or spirit could ever be. We want reasons, patterns, logic. We want to know why the lights turn on when no one's near them, why shadows move without sources, why whispers fill empty rooms. But sometimes there is no why. Sometimes there's just the experience itself, witnessed and remembered, defying everything we understand about how the world should work. The people in these stories didn't ask for these experiences. They were living ordinary lives in ordinary places until something else decided to make itself known. And now they carry those memories forward, unable to fully shake the feeling that they shared their space with something that shouldn't exist. If you've experienced something similar, you're not alone in that uncertainty. And you're not alone in the knowledge that some questions don't have comfortable answers. The light switch doesn't care if you can explain it. The shadow in the hallway doesn't wait for your acceptance. The whispers don't stop just because you can't see who's speaking. They simply are. And perhaps that's the most unsettling truth of all.